This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Saturday Social with Will Mercer. This is my very first show and I am thrilled to welcome my guest Jason Bentley. He's going to talk to us about pupil voice, choice and agency.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Okay, hello to everyone listening out there. Good morning to those of you who are in the UK. And it's a good evening from here in Tokyo, where it's been, I wish I could say something different. It's been a very gloomy day. We're getting the kickback from a typhoon, which is to the south of us. So it's really miserable. If you hear any thunder or lightning, that's why. So I am joined by Jason Bentley, an educator with years of experience, both domestic and international. He's going to talk to us about pupil agency. But before I go any further, I'm going to pass over to Jason. Jason, hello.
Hello everyone. My name's Jason Bentley. I've been an educator for some 30 years, I suppose now. About half of that I've been involved in school leadership, and I'm also a teacher trainer, but I don't profess to be an expert. I think our conversation today will be very much based on experiences over those years and my insights, but certainly not about to write any books on the subject.
No. Well, I think we should probably start, Jason, with defining what it is we're talking about. Because, I mean, agency, it's one of those issues that you hear an awful lot about. But of course, often people get into arguments, especially online, because they're talking really about different things. So talk us through your understanding of what pupil agency is.
I think that's a really important point. There are many ways of thinking about agency. I start off with just people in their ordinary lives, adults, ourselves. I think in society these days, I think many people feel like a lack of agency in their own lives. There's information overload and constant influx of social media. There's struggles to maintain life balance when we're expected to be constantly available for work, answering emails at whatever hours of the day. We have our lives curated online, and we're represented on, I don't know, LinkedIn or whatever else it might be. In that word of social comparison, I think sometimes in our lives we feel like things are a bit out of our own control. And so for me, the word agency means just that, really. It's trying to have some control over the way things happen in our lives. And in terms of student agency, well, their lives are school. One of my very favourite quotes is, "School is not a preparation for life; it is life itself."
Mm-hmm.
And while children are living that life in school, we want to know that they are empowered to make choices and decisions that impact their lives, their learning, their well-being, their whole school experience. And so, we take that view that education isn't just filling up the empty heads and giving them knowledge, but it's actually lighting fires. And children respond. Children feel that fire in their belly when it matters to them. And it matters to them when they think that they can do something about and with the learning.
Okay. So I'm hearing a lot about pupil motivation there. Now, what if someone were to come along and say, well, that's all well and good, but, I am the teacher, I am the curriculum expert, and the best way to light the fire is to show them the world as I see it and to share with them what I have already learned.
Yeah, we're not preparing children for the world that we grew up in. We're preparing them to be successful and live productive and contributing lives for themselves. And so that ownership of that life is key. And it starts off in the first few weeks of school. Is, why am I here? If I ask a child who's working on something in class, why are you doing this? The last thing I want to hear is, because he told me to. Now, you want to hear that children are invested in what they're doing. They find it interesting. They find it purposeful. And yes, we have our curriculum, but we can frame that and present that in ways that children can engage with excitement, with enthusiasm, with interest. We think in terms of it being meaningful and relevant and engaging and challenging. But one of the first steps is how do we make that learning relevant to children so that they're not just saying, do you remember at school yourself saying, I don't know why I'm learning this, I'm never going to use it? Well, there's purpose for learning these days. We're not just about gaining knowledge, we're gaining life skills, transferable skills, and understandings of things that we can apply in different contexts.
Okay, well, let me ask you then, you're talking about children here. Now, obviously, some people listening here will have lots of experience with very young children, some with older learners. Is there an age where this starts?
I think, well, one of my very, very favourite writers, sadly, is not with us anymore, Sir Ken Robinson. He did, I think, the most viewed TED Talk ever. And he wrote a book called The Element, and he wrote a lot about creativity. He said something like, children don't grow out of creativity, they're taught out of it. And the idea being, the premise is that children are naturally very creative. I think he based some of his ideas on some research, like, the paperclip experiment, where you think,
is that when they give people paper clips and they say, how many ways right. Can you use this? What can you do with this?
Right. And so the results of the people he asked being graphed showed that the older you get, the fewer ways you can think of to use that paperclip. And young children are just endless in their imagination, but the graph seems to suggest that throughout their time in school, they end up seeking for the right answer. And not only the right answer, but the right answer that somebody else tells them is right, not right in their opinion, but somebody else is defining quality, somebody else is defining correct. And so I take that same I apply that same thinking to agency. Children come to school creative and they can be taught out of creativity if not careful. Children come to school with agency. And we can, unfortunately, teach them out of that agency. We can teach them to be compliant, to be rule followers, to wait on someone else to give them the instructions and the reasons and the purposes for learning. And I think so. Back directly to your question, it starts at the very beginning. It's when children are 3 years old. We want them to feel like they can ask questions for themselves. Explore ideas that they're interested in and create things that matter to them.
Okay. It's interesting because I always think that it's very easy. I mean, agency is an abstract concept, right? And we are sitting here, we understand, the words we're saying to each other. We're having a dialogue, we're having a conversation about it. We can do that. Great. But when you've got a really young learner, like you said, 3 years old, I mean, if I'm teaching kindergarten, nursery, reception, whatever, and I say, right, everyone, can you tell me about agency? I mean, is that how you would approach it?
With regards to young children question. No, but when you introduced us today, I think you used the words voice, choice, and agency. So I think from very, very early years, children will know their voice matters because of the way we respond to their voice. Oftentimes in education, we say things like children need to feel like their voice matters. Well, children need to know. It's a difference, a slight difference, but children need to know that their voice matters, and they know that by how we respond when they express wishes or even protest. Thinking about a child's right to say no, thank you. I think that's an interesting one too. Do we receive children in school and immediately say, well, because I told you to? Or do we enter into a negotiation with them a little bit in terms of what can we do? What can we do together? So, voice and choice. We offer selections. In early years, we think in terms of invitations and provocations for learning. There's a difference between the two. An invitation, the definition, is we might set something up in the classroom and children are allowed to go and explore that if they like. And a provocation is we set something up in the classroom that we're pretty confident is going to really pique their interest and make them want to do something. But that's the goal. There's no coercions, invitations and provocations, but not coercions. And so, the voice and the choice intact, children start to see school as a place they want to be, and a place that's created for them. It's not being done to them. It's something that we're doing for them and with them.
I'm going to push you on that a little bit, because I absolutely see what you're saying. And I understand there's a slight contradiction, or maybe not contradiction, but there's a difficulty. There's something knotty at the heart of it, whereas agency has to come from the children, right? It has to be something that they generate, they are being active in. But of course, if we as teachers say, right, I'm going to have a class with loads of pupil agency, I've got to do something to make that happen. I've got to be active in making them more active. So what I'm saying is, to put it another way, I can't just do their agency for them, or it won't be their agency anymore. So again, maybe with very young learners, or maybe someone who's new to a school that does things very differently. How do you approach that if you have just some kids who get it, who go, yeah, okay, I'm going to make my voice heard, and I'm going to impact my learning and do all those things. But then you get those children who don't respond to the invitation that you mentioned. Obviously, coercion would not be the right way to go. But what can you do when the invitations don't, on the face of it, seem to be working for every child? Right?
Well, there's a model that we often use when we think about inquiry education, and I know you're familiar with this. Often shown as a swimming pool diagram, where there are different levels of student ownership, I suppose, in inquiry. Beginning with a focused inquiry that's teacher led, moving through a guided inquiry situation, and then maybe children collaboratively inquiring together, and ultimately independent inquiry. And the idea there is it's a gradual release of responsibility, that we don't want to just say to the children, jump in, good luck. Some children aren't ready to swim in the deep end yet, and they need to be holding on to a safe hand to keep them afloat and to guide them through the water. Whereas other children who can swim very confidently don't want to be held back by the limitations of whatever the teacher might have designed for that whole class, if you like. And so it's the same thing with agency. I think parenting is important. I've seen children in playgrounds with parents in the morning, and I watch those parents who stand back and let the child climb on the climbing frame, and knowing that the child has a sense of self and won't climb higher than they really want to or feel confident to, but they're not hovering with their hands sort of circling the child, waiting the whole time, or holding on to them the whole time. I've watched other parents doing exactly that, just climbing up with them and holding on to them the whole time, or possibly worse than that, even lifting the child up to a high point on the climbing frame and saying, go on, you can do it. And now the kid's terrified.
Because that's the sort of coercion, right? You're coercing them into taking a risk that, well, for them, they won't see it as, a chance of an opportunity and a chance to grow. They will see that as, get me down from this climbing frame. That's the fear impulse is going to override any learning or any thinking that's happening in that way.
Absolutely. So I began as a PE teacher, and those two examples I've just given you are very visible. We can see when children are out of their depth, and we can see when children are scared because they're too high. But the expert teacher, the very experienced teacher, can see that in a mathematics task as well. They can see that in a research project, and it's being able to make that learning visible and being close to the child all the time, even when you're metaphorically standing back and letting them do it on their own, you're still very up close to the learning and monitoring, observing, ready to guide and support when necessary, and ready to provoke.
There's a lovely quote. It stayed with me. I heard it years ago on some training course I was on once, and this wasn't really the point of the course, but it was a sort of quote. I assume the person leading the course had heard it somewhere else. I have no idea where it comes from, but it's that children need to be free to move in ways that make adults gasp. And I think that's very, I have thought that myself so many times, when I'm on the playground, I'm on break duty, whatever it is, and you see a child doing something, and of course your first reaction is, oh, get off that block or get off that, come down from there, sort of thing. And then you think, actually, is this, you know, is this really dangerous? Well, yes, if they slip and fall, but in the same way, if I step off the bus, I could slip and fall. Actually, if we are always assuming the worst is going to happen to all the children around us, we're going to completely impair any chance they have to grow, any chance to experiment. And I think, of course, I've given an example that people can, that's very obvious, very concrete example, children slipping and falling when they're playing outside. But that element of children need to be free to explore in ways that an adult not always might not always agree with at first. I think academically we can find that.
Some adults won't always agree.
Sure.
There's always people on different sides of that, and we negotiate with each other. I remember a very literal example in a school I previously worked in. We brought some really big rocks into the playground for kids to climb on, and a number of parents were up in arms. The children were going to hurt themselves, and they did. The children did hurt themselves a couple of weeks. I don't mean that too flippantly, but we had a few grazed knees and things for a couple of weeks, and then the trips to the nurse became less frequent, and ultimately these rocks in the playground were the kids' favourite thing. They'd learned how to navigate them. And I think in classrooms, the easiest teaching in the world is to open a page in the book at a level that you are told by the publishers is just right for that age children, and deliver some content and ask some questions and give the children a task to do and let them get on with it. But that isn't what you've just described. You walk into those classrooms and the children are busy. And you say to the children, what are you doing? And they can answer you. You say to the children, what are you learning? And they look at you with sort of glazed expressions and have no idea what you're talking about. And it's the same as the question, why are you doing this? There's when you present learning that is challenging, if that's a new idea to a class, and believe me, in some classes it is new, then children will protest. I can't do this. It's too difficult. When a class gets used to that, it's like, oh wow, this is difficult. I love this. This is a puzzle. This is testing me. But teachers have to be encouraged, I think, to not just have their children busily working quietly, but to introduce that bit of frustration. I said the words meaning, relevant, engaging, and challenging earlier on. And we sometimes forget the challenging because, we have these grade level expectations, and we see it sometimes as a problem if a child doesn't meet those grade level expectations. It should be the goal that those grade level expectations are difficult to meet.
Yeah, children can spot a fraud a mile off, and they know if you've given them, let's say, metaphorically, an open goal that anyone could do. And if you then act like they've done something amazing by doing that, that's just condescending, and they will pick up on that, and that's gonna be the very opposite of building trust, isn't it? So it is. It's like with so many things we do as educators, it's finding something meaningful that's in that sweet spot between not being too easy, not being kind of pointless busy work, something they already know how to do, but also not being some extraordinarily ambitious challenge they just are not ready for yet. And that will be different for children, for different children. And I suppose, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying with agency is you are enlisting the children in making that decision. You are saying to them, look, you have a good sense. If you really think about it, you have a good sense of what you can do easily, what you might be able to do with a bit of challenge and support. And children given practice and that kind of reflection, they will be able to define their goals. And all of a sudden, it's not just you trying to set the goal for the child, but it's also the child who, obviously knows a lot about what they can and can't do. It is the child as well working with you on working out what the goal is.
Yeah.
And you get that work happening at scale in your classroom with every child doing that. That's brilliant.
And bringing the agency word back in again, it's for I understand why I'm doing it. It's for me. and I understand that I can do something with this learning. It's relevant, it's purposeful. And when you have those things in place, you know Carol Dweck as well, right? The mindset writing. When you have a sense of I have some control over this, you also build a sense of I can grow. We move away from the fixed mindset of this is somebody's asked me to do something and I can either do it or I can't do it. But when I am involved in choosing what to do, when I co-construct the learning with my teacher, alongside my teacher, then I start to see it as something that, with ownership, I can move along a journey of understanding. And it's not when I'm not being judged externally by somebody else who's going to tell me whether I've passed or failed. When the judgment's internal, then I know that I'm making progress or I'm struggling and I need some help. I think another one of those observations we see in classrooms is the child that comes up to the teacher with the paper.
Apologies, that's not the sound of a child falling over in the playground. That is just an ambulance going past. Sorry if you can hear that.
On the audio. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry.
The child that holds up a picture to the teacher and says, "Is this good?" Or even a maths problem and says, "Is this correct?" And I think there again we have a little bit of an alarm bell. When you've got a line of children at a teacher's desk all waiting to get a tick or a cross in their maths book, it's a bit of an alarm bell that they're not really doing it for themselves. What I would like to say to those children is, well, you tell me, do you think you've done a good job and why? What's good about it? Whether that's a painting or a maths problem, you tell me, do you think it's correct? How can you know if you're right? Is there another way you can try and solve that math problem to find out if you're right? And if you find you're wrong, what would you do next? And embracing that potential wrongness as well.
Fantastic. Sorry.
No, well, you do need to interrupt me sometimes.
No, what? I was just going to drop and say that, I absolutely know what that's like. I'm teaching for years and I think I'm getting better at it, but I still do have children coming up to me, shoving the book or the sheet, whatever it is, in your face and say, "Is this good?" And I sort of lean back and go, "Well, do you think it's good?" And sometimes it works, and sometimes they just repeat the question. and then I realize I need to change tack, and then I realize that, okay, this is a class sort of issue. And that's when, in a way, I was doing something unfair. I was throwing a challenge at a child that perhaps they weren't quite ready for. I think this is where, it's like anything in teaching, a bit of scaffolding, some support, some coaching, some modeling really helps. There's so many different ways you can show a child, you can help a child be reflective and make a proper judgment about their own work, something meaningful, not just, oh, good, bad, but identify the next steps, something they can work on and learn.
And there's the agency key again, though. It's helping them. You want assessment capable students who understand the next steps. A child who knows where they are, where they're going, how they're going to get there, who can help them get there, and children as a class who understand those things as well as a group of children. I think I used to get into trouble. Don't tell me. Oh. I used to get into trouble as a teacher because I wasn't very keen on marking. The marking thing that older children do quite a lot of. They're always talking about marking. But the reason I didn't do any marking was because it was constant verbal feedback. I didn't need to put a tick or a cross and things because I was communicating about learning the whole time. But more than that, setting up relationships among the children where they're working with peers, peer editing. When with a peer you're looking at your writing to decide what's good and what can we improve and so on, then both people are learning, in a much richer and more authentic environment, I think.
So can I just jump in and ask something there? Because I, teacher training, my first few years of teaching, there were lots of great ways I was shown of getting what they would call it verbal feedback or peer marking and that sort of thing. So I'm going to ask you, you just said that I wasn't doing the marking because I was giving feedback in the lesson. So I'm going to ask, is that marking by a different name or is there something fundamentally different?
I think in a way it's similar, but the way I think about it is fundamentally different. So when I'm giving feedback verbally, it's much more of an interaction. It's much more, I think one of the biggest challenges with teaching is you have we have the sage and the stage model. Yeah, you've got sage on the stage, or what's the other one there? Guide
Guide
by
by
the
the side.
side. Yep, guide by the side. I think the sage on the stage should be less and less frequently observed. We should always be nurturing learning and actually partnering with children in learning. When I was a trainee teacher, my sister was already teaching, and she's always been an amazing teacher. But she handed me a book in my first year of being in college, and it said the title was "I don't know, let's find out."
Mm.
And I remember her saying to me then, notice it says "let us find out." It doesn't say "go and find out."
Mm.
Right, and so that, I mean, that was week one of teaching almost, but that stayed with me ever since. It's creating that culture in a classroom where we are building a garden, where we are exploring the solar system, where we are trying to find new ways to solve math problems. And sure, sometimes you're faking it a little bit. You'll stay ahead of the kids. You don't just go in there completely blind. But authentic inquiry alongside the children is really, really, I think, invigorating, inspiring to the kids. And hand in hand with that goes, I've made a mistake. Who can help me because I can't do this? Or saying to a child, I'm not very good at this. Can you do that? I used to when we do shared writing in the classroom, I'd very happily call a child out to do the scribing for the whole class because their handwriting was better than mine.
I get the same. Anytime I do a drawing in front of the children, it always gets gales of laughter, and I have to say, "Oh, well, I did that on purpose." And then, of course, I very much didn't. Very much my best effort.
The challenge with this is some traditionalists, perhaps in leadership, might say, "Why aren't these books marked?" and might not understand that, and also parents might have questions as well. I've looked at my child's math book and it doesn't seem to be that you haven't. The favourite one is the writing, isn't it? The writing goes home and you haven't shown them their mistakes. And what they want you to do is underline everything in red and cross things out and write over it and make them repeat spellings 3 times and stuff like that. It's very traditional minded. But I would have, with those same spellings, I would have been in the classroom with that child, read it together with them and said, "Oh, look at these words. What do we notice about them?" And that's much more meaningful feed forward than just some sort of stale feedback. I think feedback in reports, comments on portfolios, things like that are quite concrete that they can sit and reflect with, I think are useful. But the day-to-day learning is very much more organic in the moment, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I think there is so much to talk about this. I think we're pretty much in time. Well, I think we're coming up to our first break, but first I am going to go to a question which has been texted in by Sammy. Thank you very much, Sammy. And this is my reminder to remind you to please text in, all the people listening, any questions for me or Jason Bentley. So the question says, how do you encourage agency in your classroom with someone who is not used to it? So I think that's definitely a thing where, let's say you have your class, maybe you're halfway through the school year. You've got your lovely class and they're doing lots of lovely agency and they ask great questions and they're taking ownership of their learning. It's happening. Brilliant. A new child comes to join your class who comes from a school where that is very much not the way things are done. How would you approach that? Again, I guess this goes back to that question of coercion, of invitation. I mean, in your experience, I'm sure you probably can think of a specific child who fits that bill. What works in that situation?
Yeah, going back again to my first couple of years of teaching, national numeracy strategy and literacy strategies and very scripted lessons. I remember I was asked to write on the board. Walt and Wilf. Does that mean anything to you?
Walt, we are learning today. Yeah. Is that it?
We are learning to, or we're learning today.
Yeah.
Walt is we are learning to.
Yeah.
And Wilf, do you remember that one? I'm going to be glad if you can't remember.
I could throw out some random ones.
Because I'm okay with Walt. I like Walt. But Wilf, I'm not very fond of at all. Because Wilf is what I'm looking for. And I think right there, at the start of the lesson, writing on the board what I'm looking for, teacher, is the problem. So with that child, I immediately say, how will you know if you've done a good job? And it's all about the dialogue, the things we've been talking about so far. But it's all about the dialogue and the relationship you build with that child from the beginning, or from the point they're at where they're struggling. You emphasize that relationship of partnership, of expectation for their own responsibility for learning, of expectation for their own judgment. And when they realize that you're not going to be the judge and the quality control of everything, it's a gradual thing. Agency is something that develops over time and continues. It's like lifelong learning. We're born with agency, and some things can rob us of our agency, and we sometimes have to fight for agency. But ultimately, it's a life journey, and that part of life in school is there too. I don't know if I said at the beginning, I think as a teacher, we feel a sense of agency or not, right? You work in different schools, and sometimes you feel like I just have to do as I'm told. And sometimes you feel like I'm in a really creative, nurturing, collaborative environment where my voice actually matters and I have choice and I can impact the way this program develops. You feel that through the relationships with leadership and with your colleagues, that it comes to you through those relationships. And I think it's exactly the same for the children. It comes to them through a sense of what are my relationships with other children, with the teacher, and so on.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I found that absolutely fascinating, but I'm afraid we're going to have to pause just for a moment. We're going to have our first break there, and then we're going to come back and continue talking about pupil voice, agency, and choice.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
No, sorry about that. We're not going to go now, but I'm not going to play the opening jingle again. Pardon me. That's all right. We'll get this sorted out in a second. In the meantime, Jason, I'm going to ask you to move. We've been talking about the classroom and children, of course. But I want you to move to a different place in the school, the staff room. So I'm going to go return actually to Sammy's question about encouraging agency. But this time, how do you encourage agency among your staff? And I say staff, obviously not just teachers. We have EAs, TAs as well. I mean, is that the same thing? Is it invitation? Is it?
It is exactly the same thing, I believe. And it starts off with, something I think people in leadership positions often get wrong, and I'll do it. It'll slip. Is I talk about my teachers in the same way a teacher might talk about my children, and it sets a dynamic that they're not my teachers. We are a teaching team, and I rarely talk about being in charge of things or managing even. The leadership and management can sometimes be defined as quite separate things. I think it's an interdependent. They have an interdependent relationship. I think the more you turn up management, the less leadership works sometimes. And I think the more you turn up leadership, the less need there is to manage. And that's because I associate leadership with teachers with the same practice that I hope that teachers have with their children, which is I'm here to help you do the things that you can do as well as you can. And I'm here to serve you. So I can set up the systems and the structures, and I can provide resources, and I can be a shoulder to cry on, an ear to talk to. I can be asked questions and mentor and guide if people need it. I can challenge. But the point is, it's always about my role is to help that teacher be the best teacher they can be, not get them to do the things I want them to do. Right? Now, the school has a mission. The school usually would have a strategic plan, and there are certain things we've identified that we are going to do as a school, and that's our curriculum, right? That's our grade level expectations. But within that, there needs to be room for the rich tapestry, the diversity. Particularly in my teaching staff now, I love them all dearly, and because of that diversity, such different approaches, teaching styles, and so on, is powerful through their collaboration, through the ability to take risks, to know you're safe if you make mistakes, etc. So I think I can switch in students and teachers. I think almost to any part of this conversation because we're just talking human beings. I started off talking about adults, right? The sense we have in the world generally of being overwhelmed. We've all, I'm sure, worked in schools, or at least for a period of time in certain schools, where we think, well, it feels like it doesn't matter what I say. I don't agree with this. Everyone knows I have to just do as I'm told. And that's not a happy place to be. And it doesn't get the best out of anyone. Now, sure, teachers have the right to move on, but I'm all about retention. And, what are the reasons why somebody would love to work in a place like this, for example? And I think that largely comes down to whether they feel they contribute and have some control over them, what we do at school.
Now, obviously, not asking you to name names or anything like that, but I'm sure you had experiences in the past where you get the sort of the crossed arms when you're talking to your cohort of teachers, TAs, whoever it might be. Naturally, like in any organization, if you're trying to bring in something new, you're trying to change people's minds, you might meet varying degrees of resistance. Now, in your experience, what do you think are the sort of what are the objections people tend to have if you come in with this promotion of pupil agency, and what are the objections, but also how do you sort of overcome them?
Are you familiar with that model of learning that starts with unconscious incompetence? You heard that phrase?
No.
Okay, so let's see if I can remember it myself. Unconscious incompetence. I don't know what I don't know.
Right.
Okay. This can apply to children or teachers or anyone. I'm unconsciously incompetent is quite a comical phrase, I think. The next stage of learning is conscious incompetence. I know what I don't know.
Okay.
I'm aware of it. I know where I need to be going. I know I'm not good at it yet. The next stage is conscious competence.
Right.
So we've had unconscious incompetence, conscious incompetence, conscious competence. What will the next stage be?
I'm going to say conscious incompetence.
No, the next stage will be unconscious competence.
I think I just demonstrated some unconscious incompetence.
Lots of words. It's almost But unconscious competence. Think about that. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi wrote about flow. That state you're in. You're a musician, right? So that state you're in when you're playing something that you play well, and you're not really even thinking about it. It's just natural. It's flowing from you. We can have that in any walk of life. If maybe the 10,000 hours idea is relevant here, but we can get to a point where we are competent doing something really well, and we're not even conscious of it. It's just flowing from us. I think the teacher's learning journey is really relevant here. When we start teaching, we don't know what we don't know. We're hungry. Give me an idea. Give me some food. Give me some guidance. Give me some rules. We talk about give me a classroom management strategy. Give me a lesson plan, right? I haven't got it. I need it. And we move through this to this unconscious competence, I think, too quickly. We get to a point where we think we know what we're doing because we've done it so many times before, and we start to just go through the motions of teaching. And I think that happens. That's when you think teaching is stand in front of the kids and say that speech again, or show them those slides again, or hand them that reference book again, or whatever it is on page 2 of the spelling program, etc. Moving too quickly to that unconscious competence happens when you are, when you're not being reflective. It's The unconscious competence. You're driving the car, and you could also be on the phone. Something, you're just not aware that you're driving.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a safe situation to be in, is it? Do you ever get somewhere in your car and think, how did I get here?
Mm-hmm.
And you worry a little bit, like,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't thinking about it as much as I should have done.
Mm-hmm.
I think the same thing's true in teaching. You go to university for 4 years?
Mm-hmm.
And then if you think that that's going to last you a 40-year career, and you're just going to pick it up as you go along, you're wrong. You've got to be reading, you've got to be learning, you've got to be reflective. And so I think those teachers who don't get it just have to recognize that they've got to make a change. They've got to say, I'm not okay where I am. I need to be more open-minded about alternatives, and collaboration with other people and hearing other people's ideas, etc. Yeah.
Fantastic. I'm going to jump in there. We're going to take a quick break now to hear the news.
Partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Reading. Are you a teacher who has concerns about your students' low reading levels? Are you also worried disadvantaged students won't be able to catch up? The online reading development program, Dreambox Reading Plus, adapts to a student's skill level, accelerates reading progress, and helps students acquire a wide vocabulary. The patented technology develops reading fluency and supports the transition to increased text complexity from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 and 4, where language and vocabulary are more challenging. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot.
How do we stop teachers marking books on their kitchen table on a Sunday night instead of wanting to spend time with their family? Is live marking truly cutting-edge practice? What if I told you that I could provide evidence of verbal feedback and its impact on student outcomes? Now, traditional marking, time and time again, is reported as the #1 reason why teachers leave the profession. It trumps behaviour issues and teacher salary. In Guide to Feedback, I share 9 case study skills that demonstrate 9 different ways to provide marketing feedback, all evidenced by student outcomes. Now, not every school will be ready for this, but hopefully you are ready to start your feed up and feed forward journey.
The Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback is out now, and you can get an exclusive 30% discount when you order Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback from Bloomsbury.com. Just use the code TTRGTF at the checkout. That's TTRGTF, and it expires 30th of November. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
Schools Week and BBC Breakfast both focused on the importance of work experience for young people, as new research shows the scale of the challenge involved in meeting the government's aims of 2 weeks for all. A report by the Social Market Foundation looked at the role of assumed knowledge in youth transitions from education to employment. The evidence, the report says, shows that young people from more privileged backgrounds and those with graduate parents appear more confident and adept at navigating their way through education and into careers. Data from Management Information System ARBA suggests that work experience provision varies hugely across the country. But overall, while 78% of secondary schools in the sample recorded some pupils as having done some work experience in year 10, only 49% of pupils themselves actually took part. Where pupils were getting work experience, it averaged at just under a week. Just 2% of pupils completed 2 weeks. The government is aiming to guarantee 2 weeks' worth of work experience for every young person, but many say the plan is too ambitious given the current position. For the target to be achieved, many more employers will need to offer places, quadruple the current number, or at least those who already offer it to give more days to more pupils. The research suggests that there is a stark north-south divide. In all regions in the north of England, the proportion of pupils who go on work experience is lower than in the south. Schools suggest that the cost of organising and running placements was high, as it took staff to organise it and make visits, check health and safety, and that this placed pressure on already tight budgets. Some also said the pandemic had made things more difficult, as working from home had changed the way businesses work. Schools Week also reports on delays to the publication of 2024 league tables. Parents choosing a secondary school for their child this month will now not be able to see the most recent performance league tables after government delayed their publication. The move follows schools finding errors with their Key Stage 4 and 5 results data in pre-publication checks. The school's checking exercise deadline has now been extended until the 7th of November. Secondary data was due to be published on the 24th of October and would include Progress 8 scores. Parents choosing a secondary school for their child must submit their choices by October the 31st. The data allows parents to compare schools, but leaders said the delay should not cause a huge inconvenience, as many will have already made decisions based on open days, other information and experiences. The Department for Education said that a new portal had suffered technical difficulties, but that they were working hard to resolve it. The BBC reports that the government is considering a smacking ban for England. Bans have already been brought in by devolved governments in Scotland and Wales, as well as Jersey, which outlaws the use of physical violence to punish children. Plans for the laws in England were rejected by the previous government as recently as last year. The move comes following fresh calls for a ban by the Children's Commissioner for England, Dame Rachel de Souza. She said, if we are serious about keeping every child safe, it's time England takes this necessary step. In England and Northern Ireland, it is legal for a carer or parent to discipline their child physically if it is reasonable punishment. But the Children's Act 2004 made it illegal to assault a child causing actual or grievous bodily harm. Finally, Sky News covers the issue of teachers who experience bullying at work and who signed non-disclosure agreements as part of their exit from the workplace. Sky News says it has spoken to more than 320 current and former teachers from the state, private and special school sectors across the UK. Among those, 119 say they signed NDAs and received payouts. Sky News says it has calculated the amount paid out at more than £1.73 million. The National Education Union confirmed that the vast majority of financial settlements include NDAs, but that these were not appropriate as it covered up the issue and prevented further investigations. The NEU went on to say that it felt that the growth of multi-academy trust had contributed to a significant power imbalance between management and teaching staff. Ofsted declined to comment on the findings of the investigation, which also suggests pressures on leaders from the inspectorate caused additional stresses in schools. Education Minister Catherine McKinnell responded to the Sky News investigation by saying all school staff should feel safe and supported at work. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Joe Fox.
Thank you. And we're back. It's the Saturday Social with me, Will Mercer, and I'm joined by Jason Bentley talking about pupil, agency, voice, and choice. Okay, Jason, so I think we've talked a lot about the principles of agency and pupils' choice and its effect on their learning. Let's talk a bit more in concrete terms about some examples, some experiences we've had in the classroom. My first question is going to be, okay, let's say you've got your wonderful agency, your classroom's full of pupil agency, children are directing their learning, reflecting meaningfully, setting their next steps. It's going really well. What does the teacher do? Because there's that nagging suspicion that someone might say, if they were very resistant to this idea, they might say something like, oh, you just want to do this because you want the children to do your job for you. You want an easy ride. You want them to teach themselves so you can sort of sit at the back and, I don't know, daydream or something. But of course, I know you don't think that. So what is the teacher's role? Yeah, if I walked into a classroom, what would that teacher be doing while the children are all very busy doing their own thing?
I think, well, for one, being a good inquiry teacher and a teacher that nurtures agency in the classroom is far more difficult than giving all the kids the same thing to do, and telling them the same information, and taking them through the same closed lesson plan. It's the teacher role of facilitator is on so many levels more difficult because, well, first of all, you're engaging in a very holistic approach to teaching and learning. So, you're engaging the children with intellectual, but also emotional and social aspects of their learning. So you have to be working hard to get those conditions right. Motivation, collaboration, risk taking.
You're responding
Yeah.
to what's in front of you. I mean, I guess it was kind of an unfair question, if I'm honest, because as I understand it, the agency involves an element of, well, it's free will from the children, and that means it's inherently unpredictable. If it's going to be truly free will, if it's truly agency, you cannot predict it at 100%. Of course you can't.
I'm rarely talking.
So you're responding, aren't you?
Yeah.
And if you're responding,
really
you're thinking
about, I've got no idea where the kid's going to go. So if you think about a unit of learning, a unit of inquiry of some kind, we have some conceptual understanding we're trying to build with the children. And in my most experience with the primary years program, we talk about lines of inquiry. So, with 2 or 3 lines.
So I'm going to jump in, just to make it really clear. This is the IB, the International Baccalaureate. We're talking about there. Yeah.
So we have a central idea we're exploring, and to explore that central idea, we would have some lines of inquiry that we might follow. To build that big, enduring understanding, there are then those pathways that we could go down. I always think of those pathways, they're pre-planned. The teacher, we know what they're going to be. It's going to be a series of science experiments or gathering some mathematical data or something like that will help us understand that big idea. But I think of those lines of inquiry as pathways through a forest to get to that big idea that's at the end of the forest. If you follow those pathways, you will get to that big understanding. But as we go through the forest, it's a beautiful and colourful and noisy and exciting place. And you're allowed to step off the path, right? And in fact, if you just look through that clearing, there's something much more exciting that we didn't know before we set off was going to be there. We hear something, it's a waterfall. Let's go and take a look at that waterfall, and then we'll come back to the path. So I think as the teacher, you're doing everything you would have done in any traditional model of teaching and learning. You're planning to the same degree, if not more, the explicit teaching that you're going to be engaging with.
Well, year on year it will look different, won't it? Whereas,
but what you're not doing is planning that. It can't just be in a book. You're planning that, knowing your children, knowing your context, knowing where they are in the year and what they learned last year. So it's very informed planning, but it's also, you've got backwards by design is often the model that we take in planning, right? So we have our end of something assessment. We know what it's going to be, and then we plan the steps that children are going to get to that assessment successfully, right? And then they will pass that grade level expectation. But think forwards by design as well. So backwards by design is doing that, but forwards by design is we've just discovered something. Now let's think of how that can help us move forwards. So that waterfall in the forest wasn't on my plan at the beginning. But what are the opportunities now that we found this to learn something we didn't know was going to be possible before we set off? You know what I mean? Is the analogy working, or am I making it all?
I'm getting it. I'm getting it. I do like the idea of the planned path with space for diversions, but one of the biggest resources, the most precious ones that we have is time, right? And I think if a school is going to allow its teachers to teach in that way, it has to be prepared to give them time to do it. And it can take a very long time to see that waterfall. It might mean that you have to cross off something else that was on your itinerary. But as long as it's genuinely led by the children and has real student interest and real learning for them, it's fine, because they're going to remember that for the rest of their lives.
I think it's important, the piece that having a concept-driven curriculum is really, really important. The waterfall might help us understand the big idea. If the big idea was something about how the natural ecosystem of the forest works, it would help us, right? If the big idea was about, what systems work in the city on the other side of this forest, we're not going to spend too long on the waterfall.
Right.
We can have a look at it. It's pretty. Let's move on. And I think that's again that job of the teacher. When you're thinking, you keep the big conceptual understandings in mind, and you're helping the children to explore, and then you are enhancing the opportunities that come out of the things that come from them. But conceptual understanding is an interesting one, because when you think of that, the concept of concept, we're all at different places all the time. And it's not a knowledge curriculum. It's not just about we all have to know the same things. It's about we're all constructing our understanding of something. And that's very personal. Podcasts, we're doing one right now. Your understanding of podcasts is greater than mine. Okay, and somebody else will have a greater understanding than you. We can both engage. We can both engage in this, and we can both be learning about doing this thing, but we're not at the exact same place, and we're thinking about different perspectives. I'm just communicating, answering some questions, and you're managing all the structures around it. But the big idea of we're doing a podcast is the same.
I like how you keep saying we, because one thing we were talking about this earlier, about this idea of we learning along with the children, and of course we model inquiry, we model our own agency. But I think when they're really working, when you're firing on all cylinders, is when you are exploring the world along with the children.
Yeah.
You are as interested in the waterfall. You aren't being dragged along to go see it. You actually have something you want to find out.
Well, I can give you an actual, this is with the metaphor, this is an actual thing that happened once when I was teaching fourth grade many years ago. My partner teaching
waterfall. I'm just not
close. My partner and I were taking the children to a pond to explore the mini beasts, the bugs and creatures that lived in the pond. And we took our nets with us and our filter paper, and we had our keys to identify, what different living creatures were in there. We were ready. We knew we were going to look for, there's six-legged insects and there's arachnids and so on, and there's mollusks, etc. We did all that stuff. We were ready to go. We had all our bags under our arms, and off we went to the forest. We got there. We put the children safely around the pond with their little dipping nets and things, and they busied away digging into the mud trying to find living things. And Kevin was suddenly noticed to be missing. Now, Kevin was. You've all got a Kevin, right? Yeah, Kevin was that Kevin, and near the water, he'd gone missing. And my partner teacher at the time completely, I can't think of a nice phrase to put this now, was upset, was frantic.
I'm sure listeners can put their own phrase in there.
Yeah, and it was suddenly very high tones, and where the heck is Kevin? So I said, don't worry, keep an eye on the kids here. We've got a couple of teaching assistants with us. I'll go and find where Kevin's gone. I found Kevin in the woods, and he'd found some dung beetles. And there's a line of dung beetles, all with their own little ball of excrement, and they were rolling up the hill. A line of them, like 8, 9, 10 of them, just rolling up the hill. And Kevin had found these, and he was watching them. And he went, shh, come here. And I knelt down with Kevin, and I forgot about everything else, because Kevin and I had a ball for a minute. And so anyway, eventually I went,
not of dung, just a metaphorical.
They all went, right. But Kevin and I just had a great time talking about these living things that we'd found in the forest, and what were they doing and why and so on. And then I suddenly remembered all the people that were worried about us. Come on, Kevin, let's go. And we went back, and Kevin said, shouts as we were approaching the location, he said, guess what I found? And the other teacher said, I don't care, come here and sit where you're supposed to be sitting. And I just thought, right? I would have won because nobody else had found anything interesting in the water. Right? The most interesting thing Kevin found. So that's where we'd have gone off the path. But what did we go down there to do? To investigate living things in the natural habitats. To try and identify things and et cetera, et cetera. It was now, yes, I did chastise Kevin to a certain degree. You shouldn't have wandered off. He didn't. But he had some certain challenges.
But if you're sitting with him, and taking that moment to engage in what he was doing and sharing that, you're sending a very powerful message to him about, well, if this adult thinks this is worth paying attention to, and I found something interesting, that in of itself is quite a powerful message. Yeah. I mean, I love, if we're on water-based experiences here, I've got a time I had with a class once where, we were looking at the environment, we were looking at school, we were looking kind of at the mini pieces actually. We were looking at what creatures we can find outside the classroom and what trees were growing, all that sort of thing. And it was a very dry landscape, sort of trees, very dusty though. And we had the idea of building a pond. Now, this was something I had absolutely zero experience with in my own life. I simply didn't know a thing about it. So I said to children, let's find out how to build a pond. And I wasn't faking it. I wasn't sort of, playing dumb, as it were. I genuinely did not know. We had to find out together. And, I learned something there. I learned something it was obviously meaningful to me as a teacher, because it meant we built something that my students, my pupils loved. But it's still there to this day. It's thriving. The children are a couple of years older, but they still want to go back and check on it.
I mean, that's huge, because you think about what the learning was there. Do your children need to know how to build ponds to get through into the university of their choice, etc.? No. These are life skills. So asking questions that can be researched. How do we get information? How do we do the research? Collaborating with each other, communicating what we want for this pond, designing, and so on. I mean, it's endless, almost, the list. And I think that's another key factor here. We have to recognise that schools should have moved on from when I was at school. When I was at school, I remember my home. Okay, it's giving my age away now. There were 2 TV channels in the UK when I was a young schoolboy in primary school. We hadn't had our third. We certainly didn't get Channel 4. That was very rebellious when that came along. And the 2 TV channels, there was no remote control. My dad had his, he used to tell me to get up and turn over if he wanted the other channel. But that was it. And it was very rarely anything on the TV that I was interested in. And documentaries were never made for kids. It was always, for the adults. And so we had the news, whatever Dad wanted to watch. We didn't have any books in the house really either. I'm not saying we were desperately poor. I know a house in our street bought Encyclopedia Britannica. You ever hear of that? Yeah. The A to Z of everything type thing. And I once found K in a jumble set and bought K. I know nothing about kangaroos and so on, but I only had that one book. Right. Limited. But what did I have? I had school, and school was the font of knowledge. If I went to school, I could learn about ancient Egypt or Greece. I remember doing a project on ancient Greece and learning that, fact or fiction, I don't know, but learning that if children were born with any physical disabilities, they were fed to the dogs, and included in those physical disabilities was being flat-footed. And I was flat-footed, and I remember that connection and the excitement of drawing warriors, legionnaires, Greek Spartans, and all these things. It was the only place the knowledge existed. Now look at the world. The knowledge is
completely. More knowledge than you could ever, for any human being, could ever process. We're just carrying around.
So I don't need to think that my job is to give Kevin the name of the centurion soldiers who whatever. I don't need to give him those facts. What I do need to give Kevin is the desire to be curious about those things. I need to help him develop a sense of curiosity and then the skills to find out.
Fantastic. Yeah. I think we're going to take, if it's okay with you, a quick pause there for some messages.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading. Are you a teacher who has concerns about your students' low reading levels? Are you also worried disadvantaged students won't be able to catch up? The online reading development program, Dreambox Reading Class, adapts to a student's skill level, accelerates reading progress, and helps students acquire a wide vocabulary. The patented technology develops reading fluency and supports the transition to increased text complexity from Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 and 4, where language and vocabulary are more challenging. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot.
How do we stop teachers marking books on their kitchen table on a Sunday night instead of wanting to spend time with their family? Is live marking a truly cutting-edge practice? What if I told you that I could provide evidence of verbal feedback and its impact on student outcomes? Now, traditional marking, time and time again, is reported as the #1 reason why teachers leave the profession. It trumps behaviour issues and teacher salary. In Guide to Feedback, I share 9 case study schools that demonstrate 9 different ways to provide marking feedback, all evidenced by student outcomes. Now, not every school will be ready for this, but hopefully you are ready to start your Feed Up and Feed Forward journey.
The Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback is out now. You can get an exclusive 30% discount when you order Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback from Bloomsbury.com. Just use the code TTRGTF at the checkout. That's TTRGTF, and it expires 30th of November. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
Okay, thank you, and we're back. So this is Saturday Social with Will Mercer, and I'm joined by Jason Bentley, and we've been discussing, well, lots of things, really. I mean, we certainly have covered pupil agency, voice and choice, and we've also talked about some other topics as well. But to return to something that we were talking about just before the break, the internet, smartphones, technology, I can carry all the knowledge, more knowledge than I could ever possibly need in my pocket. So why do I need school? What's it for?
I think one of the first things I think when I hear you say that question is how to navigate all of that safely. In terms of technology, it's very easy to use technology in schools as a babysitting tool, right? We can put an iPad in the kid's hand and they can click a bunch of boxes that say, what's the answer? Click, click, click. And I think very much in terms of children being in the driving seat. Work with a brilliant IT coordinator who drummed this into me. Who's in control? Is the computer controlling the child, or the child controlling the computer? And I also think a lot about not just being consumers, but being producers. So when we get knowledge, what do we do with it? So helping children to understand that they are in control, and when they learn, they can do something with it. That's the agency, right? I'm going to do something. I have the power to do something with it. Be creative. And ultimately, there's a whole world of need to think about digital citizenship. Think about echo chamber effects. It's new to our generations, and kind of goes back
learning about it. Again, we as adults have to learn about this stuff. as it comes up, because it is totally new to anyone.
And so, we think about we're preparing children for their future, not our past.
Mm-hmm.
So schools always have to be thinking of what might be in the future, and we can't predict. It's well known that the rate of change is such that we don't know. Children will be doing jobs that don't exist today. We don't know what their future is, but we do know certain things are going to be valuable. Right? They often get called soft skills, and I don't like that phrase, because I think these are the toughest, the most important things. So children need to develop those transferable 21st century soft, whatever you want to call them, skills that can be used in any context, no matter how unpredictable. They'll be valuable. First and foremost, it's social skills, right? With AI and all of that, a lot of things will be done by computers. So humanity, relationships, psychology, those things are going to be really, really important to us.
Even in the most straightforward sense. I mean, we see it, those of us who teach, especially the very youngest children, teachers often talk about this idea of a COVID generation or a COVID gap or whatever you want to call it. And of course, in some cases that the children have missed out on formal schoolings. They might simply not know, their timetables. They aren't at the age-related expectations that might be required by a certain school system. But it's more fundamental than that for a lot of kids. You have children who are unable to share, unable to play. They can't handle losing. They don't know how to listen to another child. And it's not. I don't want it to be doom and gloom. I'm not saying it's not universal. It's not inevitable. But I feel like we see that quite a lot with children at the sort of the beginning stages of primary at the moment. And there's lots of factors. I'm not going to be one of those people who says, "Oh, it's all to do with COVID," as in 2019 was a totally different world. It wasn't. But I think these things, these social skills are important. They will never really go away. I mean, if COVID was one thing, it's that the power of human connection is absolutely crucial. We seem to have a desire, a need to be in the same room, to talk face to face to people. I mean, what we're doing right now is such a great example. I mean, I think the podcast, it's in many ways, it's quite a modern phenomenon. It feels the last few years, so it's a joke about how many people have just started a podcast. They've become very, very common. But if you look at it, if you really think about it, it's a very old-fashioned medium in the sense that it's just of people talking in a room. I mean, people have done that for as long as people have spoken to each other.
And that's the key, that we can't predict the future, but we do know, we can fairly confidently assume that people will still be talking to each other. Right, there are some things we think are going to always be important. I think schools are remarkably, in my mind, stuck in a way in a model of the way things used to be. So I actually believe that no one in their right mind designing schools today would think, well, the best thing to do would be to make a concrete building with certain, rectangular rooms, put 20, 25 kids in one of them, and have them spend most of the day in there. That by design, I don't think it's great design. We would do something different. Likewise, why do we do that? Because that's the way we needed to manage. And we put them in according to their, as Ken Roberts said, their date of manufacture. They're all the same age in that class. Some people, in their wisdom, do multi-age classes. That sometimes works. But basically we say, well, you were all born this month, therefore you should all be doing the same things at the same rate, and this is your grade level expectation. And we have other things like, lining up, raising your hand, stuff like that. It's a throwback, I believe. Remember, I'm not writing books, they're just my opinions. I believe
I'm going to remind people to text in if you have an opinion on this, as I'm sure many, many people do. Please do.
For me, it's a throwback to when one of the main purposes for school teaching social skills was social compliance. Right? We needed people in factories. We needed people working for the boss. We needed people in large groups, in big mills, whatever else it might have been. That's why we do the written procedure of calculations, right? The children didn't need to understand the numbers. They just had to be able to calculate them quickly because they hadn't invented the computer yet. So that kind of column addition and column multiplication thing is not.
Well, it does work. I mean, you know, if you can understand the columns and the place value,
Right.
you can
But
manipulate
now we
them
want to understand.
Mm.
Back then, we just taught that. There was no need to talk about partitioning or place value or anything. They just had to never work out anything bigger than, was it, I suppose 9 times 9 would be the biggest number they'd have to do. Right? They didn't have to know what place in the hundreds, tens, units, etc. it needs to go to. But my point is that many of these things, whether I'm right or wrong on all of them, they began in a school system that was invented a long time ago. And when we talk about social skills, the schools were teaching children for that society. Now, the society moving forward, we don't know what it is, but it's different already and it will continue to change. So what are the social skills that we want? And I think your reference to COVID was huge. You know, what happens if we lose the opportunity to develop those social skills? It's tragic. So imagine a group of children who don't know how to function effectively.
It's harder the older they get. Yeah, it's far harder to learn how to play when you're 15 than when you're 5.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so along with those social skills, there's also self-management.
Mm-hmm.
You know, how do I manage my time? How do I set goals? How do I look after my health? You know, how do I organize my resources? That's important to learn that as well. And communication, part of the social skills as well. So thinking about, I've got an idea, how I share it. Now, when I think of the future, I remember having we used to have long debates as to whether children should practice handwriting. Now we have long debates as to whether they should even practice typing, because will we be able to just think to the computer and it will record our thought? I mean,
I've had lots of children who they can work on iPad. They can use a touch screen. But if you give them a physical keyboard, really struggle to type even a basic word. You know, they're almost basically unable to use it, or at least they really have to be taught how to do it step by step. And that's a change. That's a change I don't think people would have predicted 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Same way.
So our job is to, as I keep repeating, we don't know, but our job is to think, how do we spend our time? There's only so many hours a day. What, 190 or less days of school a year?
195.
Yeah.
Depends on your system, but that's the standard.
Yeah. But you know, with that time, what's the most important thing to do? What proportion of your time do you spend developing social skills or self-management skills or communication skills?
This comes back to what we were saying earlier. Most important resource we have, perhaps, is time. Right? We have. Sometimes it feels like we have lots of it, but it's never empty. We're always busy, and everyone knows about the time that we're being asked. Often that feeling that so many people, I'm sure everyone's had at some point, where you feel you are being asked to do 10 hours worth of teaching in 6 hours of lesson time or whatever it might be, of unrealistic expectations of doing less, of doing more with less, all that stuff. And I think with a lot of agencies, people will agree with the idea. I think a lot of people will say, yeah, great, children, ownership, control of learning, but then it's giving people time to make that happen properly. This is
where I'm the closest, because you know that old adage, you can give a man a fish, he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish, he'll feed himself for life, right? That's where the agency comes in, because what we're doing is we're nurturing curiosity. We're making learning meaningful and relevant to the children. We're giving them the skills to find out for themselves, to question, to communicate their findings, to work with other people. We're expecting a life of learning. So what we're talking about doing in schools now is it's not just preparing them for the test to go and work in the factory to get the O level or whatever. It's about preparing them for life, to be functioning, contributing citizens for the rest of their lives. And I talk about the kind of people who are going to make the world a better place. You walk down the road every day and you see people that you wish they were better people. Like they stare at you walking down the path, bump into you at the supermarket, steal your car parking space, whatever it might be. Society needs good people on a basic community level, but it also needs problem solvers on a global scale. I'm not about to teach a 9-year-old child how to solve global warming or anything like that, but I do get to equip them for a life of learning, the attitudes, the dispositions, the skills that will mean they can learn to fish for them, for themselves and continue learning.
I mean, the best way to future-proof your curriculum is to, if I understand what you're saying, the future is inherently unknowable. It is unpredictable. We've all seen examples of that in our own lives. So the honest response as educators is to equip children with a certain a good basis, a great foundation of flexible skills, of dispositions, those tools they can use to cope with change, because change the world definitely will. We're going to take one quick break here, and then we'll be back for our final section.
Partnership with Broadcast Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncatsbookshop.com to explore the full range of courses. Use the code JCTTR2425, 20% off your order. You're reading. Are you a teacher who has concerns about your students' low reading levels? Are you also worried disadvantaged students won't be able to catch up? The online reading development program, Box Reading Fast, adapts to a student's skill level, accelerates reading progress, and helps students acquire a wide vocabulary. Patented technology develops reading fluency, supports the transition to increased complexity, Key Stage 2 to Key Stage 3 and 4, where language and vocabulary are more challenging. You can try the program with a free 4-week pilot today. Search Reading Solutions UK to find their website and request your free pilot.
How do we stop teachers marking books on their kitchen table on a Sunday night instead of wanting to spend time with their family? Is live marking truly cutting edge practice? What if I told you that I could provide evidence of verbal feedback and its impact on student outcomes? Now, traditional marking, time and time again, is reported as the #1 reason why teachers leave the profession. It trumps behaviour issues and teacher salary. The Guide to Feedback, I share 9 case study skills that demonstrate 9 different ways to provide marketing feedback, all evidenced by student outcomes. Now, not every school will be ready for this, but hopefully you are ready to start your feed up and feed forward journey.
The Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback is out now, and you can get an exclusive 30% discount when you order Teacher Toolkit Guide to Feedback from Bloomsbury.com. Just use the code TTRGTF at the checkout. That's TTRGTF, and it expires 30th of November. Happy reading.
Do you ever wish you could sit down with other teachers and delve into the challenges and opportunities we face? Well, that's exactly what Table Talks at Bet UK is all about. Join small roundtable discussions based on your selected topics to share insights, learn from peers, and tackle the big issues in education, all in a sponsor-free environment. This is your chance to connect and collaborate like never before. Be part of the conversation at Bet UK in January 2025. Visit uk.betshow.com to learn more.
Okay, thank you. Right, we're back for the final sections of Saturday Social with Will Mercer, and I am with Jason Bentley. So, Jason, just to reiterate what I understand you were saying before, if we accept that, the world is changing, it will change a huge amount. What should education look like? We have to accept that part of education will be to equip children to deal with change. And the best way to do that is to think about skills that will help them cope with change and respond positively to it and, make the world a better place, as it were. And of course, that's over and above that's education as opposed to training, where if I understand you were saying earlier, you're talking about training for employment rather than training children for the world which we live in or the world that we used to live in. we need to be thinking about education, and if education is to be worthy of the name, it must produce children who can be confident adults of tomorrow in the driver's seat, taking an active role in a changing world, rather than simply feeling like they're on the receiving end of a chaotic and changing world.
Yeah, exactly. I think we define pupil agency as being able to make choices and decisions that impact their learning and their well-being and their whole school experience. So partnering with the children in a way where they feel they have their power. I just did it. I said they feel they have power. When they actually have power, they know that they have the power to influence things, to achieve things, to.
I mean, is that the difference between experiencing the world as chaotic and experiencing the world as having some sort of order?
Yeah.
If you feel you can have, against that word agency, if you feel you are an agent in the world who can have some small effect on it, you have that grounds your experience in a way, and that provides a sort of a basis which will help you. I'm making my words mixed up here, but that will provide you with a sort of solid core of your own self. Whereas I think when people are wholly passive in their life, that's when resentment builds up. That's when they feel things are done to them rather than them doing things.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I talked about teaching children to think for themselves, to manage themselves, to conduct research, ask questions, be curious, to communicate with other people what they found, to have strong social connections and social skills, to manage their relationships and have successful relationships. We started today, I think when we started talking, I was talking about being overwhelmed in society, right? Mm-hmm. I talked about information overload, about that social media thing, the work-life balance when you're still writing reports at midnight on a Saturday night. The social comparison, whether it's Facebook and how wonderful my holiday was, or am I presenting myself well enough on LinkedIn for my next job? I mean, there's that real sense of well, I feel a sense of overwhelmingness, is that a word? Because of those things and other things. And it's because I'm having to learn the skills to navigate that now. I think school could have done a better job for me in preparing me to navigate the world that is my current. And that leads me to feel very responsible to prepare the children for the world that will be their future. And not just in a way where they're not drowning, but in a way where they can contribute meaningfully to society and maybe be part of steering away from some of the possible pitfalls and concerns that we have now. We've said it loads of times, to make the world a better place. And that's agency. That's knowing that I have the skills that are important and can be impactful in changing or steering at least the course of my life and maybe the lives of other people and society in general. That my voice matters and the choices I make matter, and I'm not just a stick on the stream bouncing along aimlessly.
I think that is a really lovely place to leave it. I'm afraid we are out of time, but that was the Saturday Social with me, Will Mercer, and my guest, Jason Bennett. Jason, that was brilliant. Thank you so much.
Always a pleasure talking with you. Yeah.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.